Good afternoon, everyone. I am here with Chris Taft, Head of Collections at the Postal Museum, who will be talking about King Charles's new stamp. This presentation, Stampex talk, will include some of the design process, behind the scenes work at the exhibition, and general insight into the new stamp. If you have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A, and Chris will answer them at the end of the session. And Chris, lovely to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. Over to you.
Great, thanks Isabel. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me, and I hope everyone's been enjoying the virtual Stampex show thus far. As Isabel said, this is sort of an overview of the Postal Museum's current temporary exhibition on the King stamp, as well as a little bit of a kind of an insight into how we develop exhibitions at the museum, the process that we involve ourselves with, and how these things kind of come together. And also a little bit of a sight of the development of the new definitive stamp for King Charles. What this won't be is a sort of definitive history of the development of that stamp, because obviously that's developed by Royal Mail, not by the Postal Museum. So I don't have all that information. It wouldn't be my place to say, but I will be giving you some insights into the process we went through in terms of getting information about the stamp and being able to exhibit the new stamp and the process that went behind it. And as Isabel says, I'm very happy to take questions at the end as well. So really, for the Postal Museum, the story of the development of this exhibition in some ways began in September 2022, when sadly we learned the news of the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. The day after the announcement was made that the Queen had died, we put up these two display stands in the museum as a memorial and as a sort of mark of respect for the late Queen. Obviously, these were things that we'd had in plan for quite some time. We were obviously had to have these ready to go in the event of this happening. And so we actually got these out that evening and put them up the following morning, so that they were there on the Friday morning when we opened the museum, following the announcement that evening of the passing of the Queen. And this was the first stage of a planned sort of series of things that we were going to do in the event of the Queen's death. We called this, as is probably universally known, the sort of code word for the passing of the Queen was London Bridge. And so this was always known as our London Bridge project. And this was actually London Bridge, or LB as we tended to call it, LB1. This was the first phase of what we were going to do following the announcement of the death of the Queen. And this was the thing we wanted to get done immediately, which we did. So we just simply put together this small display. LB2, the second phase of our contribution, was a slightly bigger display, looking back, a sort of retrospective, but a reflective, respectful sort of look back at the way that the Queen had been portrayed on stamps and in the post throughout her 70-year reign. This exhibition really, this display is still on at the museum. It's intended that this stays for quite some time. It will be replaced in time, but for now, this sort of stays. This was launched a few weeks after the death of the Queen. Again, it had been largely planned in advance, knowing that one day this would happen. And this was really to look at how the image of the Queen has evolved over time and appeared on postage stamps. And this, as I say, was not designed to be there just temporarily, but this was to be there longer term. So this is, as I say, still up at the museum now, if you wish to go and see it, and it will be for quite some time. So this was the second phase of our project. This is what we were calling LB, London Bridge 2. The third phase of the project, London Bridge, was always to then look forward to the development of the new definitive stamp, new postage stamps for the new King. This was something, of course, that we couldn't plan in any great detail. We had obviously no idea about when this would take place. We had no idea, of course, when we first came up with the idea, when the event would happen. We then had no idea within the sort of immediate timescale of when material would be available related to a new stamp. So this was a lot more complicated to plan. Certain amount of planning we could, of course, do in advance. but some of it had to be done kind of on the hop. And of course, what we had to also factor in is that we've got limited space in the Postal Museum. We've got a temporary exhibition space, which is was in use at the time. And we had a commitment to deliver that temporary exhibition. So we had to sort of, we couldn't cut short the current temporary exhibition by much. We had to sort of factor in future temporary exhibition plans that we had. What we did in the end was we delayed the start of our next temporary exhibition and inserted this temporary exhibition on the King stamp in and delayed the exhibition that was to follow. So as with all, and as I said at the beginning, what I want to do is give you a little bit of an insight into how we develop exhibitions at the Postal Museum. And as with all with all exhibitions we develop at the museum, we begin with an interpretation plan. This is a big document, of which this is just a screenshot of the front cover and one page of it, but just to sort of illustrate it. So this is many pages long. I think this is about 30 pages long, and all of our exhibitions start with an interpretation plan. In it, we set out our aims and objectives for the exhibition, the audience we're targeting with the exhibition, the key stories and key messages that we hope to get across in the exhibition. We then identify the key strands, the themes that we want to talk about, and the principal kind of objects that we would display, the material that we would exhibit, some of the imagery we'd use, the interactive elements we'd use, the program that would sit around the exhibition. And so this interpretation plan had been drafted sometime in advance, but was of course sort of beginning to be finalized rather rapidly as events unfolded. And one of the things that is sort of illustrated on this slide is just that some of those key stories we thought about in those early days, the sort of main stories we wanted to pull out and the narrative we wanted to tell within this exhibition, which I'll take you through in a bit more detail shortly. We began to think about the sort of look and feel of the exhibition, how we wanted it to appear, how we wanted it to feel for people. Obviously, this was sort of a mix of a sort of celebration of a new reign, a celebration of a new stamp design, but also, of course, reflective of the fact that this marked the end of a period of a long reign and a very significant reign in terms of postal history. So we wanted to sort of mix and blend the sort of seriousness and importance of this subject, the sort of regal nature of this exhibition, alongside, of course, the making it appealing to our audiences. And as many of you know, if you visited the Postal Museum, we get a very kind of diverse audience visiting. We get people of all ages. We get a lot of younger visitors. So we had to sort of balance something that would appeal to all audiences, not just people who had a sort of specialist interest in the subject. We begin often by sort of plotting out the stories we want to tell and thinking about the space that we've got available to us and how we might want to sort of tell the story through the space. And we begin usually with a very rough sketch, sometimes not even as advanced as the sketch I've got on the screen now, but it's usually just a sort of pencil sketch of how we roughly imagine it being laid out. Now, anybody who's visited the King stamp today will know that this isn't exactly as it is at all, but this is literally just an example of how we would set something up, think about where our stories go. And this is before we've even appointed a designer to our exhibitions. And this is not a design, this is merely a sort of layout to think about the flow. We then start thinking about the content in a bit more detail. We think about the type of interpretation we want to use. We obviously work on the sort of interpretation structures that we've got. We know we've got exhibition panels, we've got certain types and sizes of panels, so we kind of work to those. And we've begin to work up text, work up the main narrative, breaking it down into sort of series. And then this is all very much done as a collaborative sort of piece of work. One curator will write the initial text. It will then go via a number of people in the organisation to check it both for accuracy, for readability, to ensure that the stories are coherent and linked together. This all happens at the same time as we begin to work with an exhibition designer who begins to pull together some of the sort of design for the exhibition. Alongside this, we start to play around with the sort of thing that we want to exhibit in the show. So we think about the type of material we've got in the collection that we want to show, and we spend a lot of time playing around with the layout of that exhibition and those exhibits. So we work in our conservation studio, usually the curator of the exhibition and the conservator. In this case, it was myself, one of our deputy curators, Georgina, and our conservator, Jackie, who work together on laying out the cases. So we mock up on a piece of paper the size of the shelves in our display cases or the panels on the wall, depending on when we're exhibiting material. And we either use the original items in some cases, as you've seen some of the photographs here, or we use photocopies of them, or we use, in some cases, in the top left image, a sort of scrap of paper just to represent the size of an object. Just to play around with it, see what fits, see what doesn't fit, see how we would arrange it sort of roughly. And a really important part of this process is then think about how we can mount the object up, how we can display it. As you'll see perhaps in the larger image on the right, there's a little note at the bottom that says find mount. So we have to obviously look at whether we have suitable display mounts, these sort of perspex stands that we can hold objects up on. Sometimes we've got some of the right shape and size, sometimes we haven't. Where we haven't, we obviously have to have new ones made, so they need to be specified, designed and ordered in advance and in plenty of time for them to arrive. Sometimes, of course, we find something amongst what we already have. And sometimes, often, we have to have a mount specially made for something. So the wire medal, which you can see referenced on the piece of paper in the top left image, that had a special mount specially made for it because it's an unusual object, it's a very particular shape and size. The chances of us having something to fit that exactly was slim. So we would have a special mount made for that. And that's, of course, exactly what we did. So this is a really time-consuming but really important part of the process of developing the exhibition, finding the exhibits, thinking about how to group them, which objects go next to which objects, where the story is, where the flow of the story is, how visitors will explore the space. So what will they see first? Because a lot of our cases are four-sided cases. So what side do we have facing sort of out and what side do we have facing in? So that people can sort of see the material in the correct order or the best order for the story to make the most sense. At the same time as all this is happening, we're working with our exhibition designer. So for this exhibition, we decided we wanted to appoint an exhibition designer that would be able to sort of respond to the brief we had for this show, that actually would be able to understand the need to give the story the sort of required level of sort of importance and respect, whilst at the same time making it work for the broad audience that we get through the museum, with hundreds of people through the door on a single day. So it needed to be sort of robust to stand up to the use that the exhibition would get, but also be able to convey the story we wanted. So the exhibition designers come up with a sort of a design to use the space. That then allows us to think about, as I mentioned, how we lay out display cases, how we orientate our exhibits, and the flow of the story to the space. As many of you know, we're still a relatively new museum, only having opened in 2017, and we are beginning to learn better how visitors use the spaces we've got in the museum and what route visitors take. So we're trying to sort of build that into our thinking, to think about the way people walk around the space and the way, therefore, the story needs to flow, and how we need to ensure we exhibit the material in the best way to be seen. We also think about the layers of text that we use, so the way we layer the information. And with this exhibition, what you'll see when you visit, or you've visited already, is we have the kind of blue panels which have the main header text on, the main stories. We have the sort of smaller purple text panels, which again go slightly deeper into the story, and our captions, and our smaller red panels that really are there for younger visitors. They're at a lower level, they're a sort of basic level of interpretation, to try and give a range of material for a range of visitors. So to take you through the exhibition and the main stories and the main themes, what we wanted to do, what we decided early on, is we wanted this exhibition to be a story of the development of the definitive stamps. We wanted to start at the beginning with Queen Victoria and build towards the reveal of the new stamp for King Charles III. And that was the main purpose of this exhibition. It was to be timed to coincide with the release of the image of the stamp to the public. And ultimately, of course, the release of the stamp itself on sale. So we wanted to sort of give visitors who didn't know the background to the development of definitive stamps that introduction. So this is an introduction really to the definitive stamp. So we begin, of course, with Queen Victoria. Within the Postal Museum, we already have and have had since we've opened a sheet of penny blacks on display in the main gallery. So we decided not to include the penny black again in this exhibition in its sort of form, but to instead include some of the designs, some of the artwork, some of the initial concepts behind it, and include the 2-penny tuppenny blue sheet instead in the display. So we wanted really with Queen Victoria to look at where stamps began and to introduce to visitors unfamiliar with philately the concept of the definitive stamp. We moved on, of course, chronologically to then look at each of the monarchs in turn that were to follow. And what we pulled out was a couple of key stories for each monarch in terms of the development of their postage stamps. We wanted to show the basic artwork, the basic stamp design that went into it. Also, some important stories as part of the development of the definitive stamp in that particular monarch's reign. So with Edward VII, what we wanted to reflect on really was the decision that was made upon his accession to the throne to continue the practice of, or to start the practice rather, of the monarch's image facing to the left on postage stamps. As many of you will know, on coinage, the image of the monarch flips with each new monarch, so they face the opposite way to their predecessor. The question was raised in 1910 as to whether to do this with postage stamps. Very quickly, it was decided that it would look odd for the monarch to be looking out off the edge of an envelope. And so the decision was recorded that with postage stamps, that custom wouldn't be sort of continued as it is with coins, and that the image of the monarch would always face to the left on postage stamps. So we wanted that to be one of the key stories we told. We also wanted to exhibit some of the treasures from our collection. We sort of saw this exhibition as an opportunity not only to tell the story of the development of the postage stamp and to reveal the new definitive stamp for Charles III, but also to be a sort of treasures exhibition of our philatelic collection, really, and show some of the most significant pieces that we hold, some of which we've never exhibited before, and some of which we haven't exhibited for very many years. So with Queen Victoria, we exhibited some of that initial proof work for the penny black. With Edward VII, we've exhibited the Tyrian plum sheet. This is a sheet of one of which only 2 sheets survive, both of the surviving sheets in the museum's collection. And since the museum's opened in 2017, we've never exhibited this sheet of stamps. So obviously a very, very rare and very, very important sheet of stamps. It's something that has very, very particular conservation and preservation requirements. It's not something we actually get out very often. But this was an important, significant exhibition. We wanted to be able to show this very important item from the collection. And so for the first time, and probably the only time for a long time, this is on display in the Postal Museum at the moment and will be until the exhibition ends in September. With George V, we wanted to explore George as the stamp collecting monarch, the philatelist king, look at the fact that how he influenced the design of stamps in his reign, looked at the different style of profile head that was used, essentially two designs that were used, but looking at the framing that went around it and the ornate decoration of the framing, and drew on references and material within the Royal Mail archives that we manage that actually show the king's own influence in terms of the stamp design. One of the things we wanted this exhibition to do was to show how stamps have been influenced by previous stamps and how they in turn have influenced later stamps. Edward VIII, of course, was to be but short on the throne, but again, obviously stamps have been produced. Again, we wanted to look at some of the different designs, some of the different material that we have in the collection that might illustrate this. Some of what you see on the screen was never used in the exhibition. These are just ideas at this stage of the type of things we could do. This is like a mood board, really, of what we could create. And looking at some of the stories we could tell. And with Edward VIII, the story that really came through was that of the 17-year-old Bill Hubert Brown, who submitted to the post office, as it was then, a proposed design, which you can see on the sort of the largest image in roughly the middle of the screen, the 3p stamp example there. This was a boy, a say 17, who submitted a design saying, this is what I think, you know, we ought to have for the new king. And we actually have the correspondence in the archives that goes back and forth between the post office and the father of Hubert Brown, commenting on the fact that this design would be was ultimately used as the inspiration for the stamp that was to follow, which you can see immediately below it. And again, we've got this original sketch in the collection and on display in the exhibition. With George VI, the main story really here was the sort of speed with which the designs for his stamp had to be produced. The abdication, of course, was unexpected, and a coronation had been planned for Edward VIII. The decision was taken to stick with the coronation date for George VI, so the date of the coronation wasn't pushed back, which meant there was a much, much shorter period of time in which to develop the design for George's stamps. Our main story here was around how King George decided to sort of go halfway between really the ornate design of his father with the ornate decorative frames that we saw for George V, and the much, much plainer and bolder sort of style that his brother had chosen that we saw. So there's a sort of compromise here with the kind of sort of symbolism around the edge of the stamp with the national symbols, national emblems, the rose, the thistle, shamrock and the daffodil. But, you know, a lot less than the sort of ornate framing that George V had. We also looked at some of the wartime emergency stamps that were produced or prepared for in the event of destruction of stamp printing houses during the Second World War. So they were the sort of two main stories we decided to focus on. And then with, of course, the area around looking at Queen Elizabeth II, what we decided here was not to focus too heavily on the designs of Elizabeth II, because, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we have a whole 2 display cases dedicated to the designs of the stamps for Queen Elizabeth. So we didn't want to sort of go too heavy on that story, because that's told elsewhere in the exhibition, but of course it had to be acknowledged. So much of the work here was, you know, in the large red letters on the panel here, items for panels only rather than display, because a lot of this material was on display elsewhere in the gallery. One thing we decided not to include, but I decided I would include here in the presentation, is a section on stamps of Charles. Charles, as he was Prince of Wales and even beforehand. we decided then not to do it. We thought it would just be too much for the space we've got and complicate the story too much. But we did think about whether we would include examples of where the future king had appeared on stamps prior to his accession to the throne. As I say, we decided not to do that in the end. We also wanted within the exhibition to look at how else the monarch is represented through the post and look at royal ciphers. Royal ciphers, as you know, appear on postal vehicles and letterboxes. There's a lot of interest in letterboxes and ciphers on letterboxes. So it was important for us to include this somewhere. So we wanted to look at how the ciphers adapted for postal use, looking at the ciphers of each of the monarchs, with the exception of Queen Victoria, which we don't have any artwork for in the museum collection. But we have artwork for all of the other ciphers. We wanted to look at how that's been used and explain really to people who, again, who don't know the story so well, how ciphers are used by the post office on items that are designed to carry the mail. So ciphers can only be used on items such as postal vehicles and letterboxes that actually carry live mail and can't be used on other things. We also wanted to reflect on the story of the cipher of Queen Elizabeth, the story of the development of the Scottish cipher, the Scottish insignia that appears on postal vehicles in Scotland and on letterboxes in Scotland, and the campaign in the early 1950s when Elizabeth came to the throne around the recognition that she was the second Queen Elizabeth of Scotland. In fact, there hadn't been a previous Queen Elizabeth in Scotland that ruled in their own name. And there were some quite serious campaigns against the use of the E2R insignia on letterboxes in Scotland in the early 1950s, to the point where in 1955 the decision was taken to introduce the Scottish crown, the crown of St Andrew, on letterboxes in Scotland. And so some of the designs for those Scottish crowns we've included within the display. Whilst we wanted to focus this exhibition on the development of the definitive stamp, many visitors, of course, don't necessarily distinguish definitive stamps from commemorative or special stamps. So we wanted obviously to include a little bit of material on this. We wanted to show the earliest special stamp, the Wembley British Empire Exhibition stamp. So we want to include some of the artwork for this. To show really where the story of the development of these types of stamps came from. We also wanted to look at some of the, I mean, there's, as you know, literally hundreds of things we could have chosen to show around the development of the sort of commemorative stamp. We decided to focus obviously on a small example, a small selection of material. We thought famous trains was quite a good one to use. It's a topic that's quite popular. It's a nice design of stamp. We actually have a large piece of artwork for this stamp again, which we're displaying again for the first time in many years, if not ever, where we've actually displayed the Flying Scotsman artwork. We had it reframed to make it in keeping with the sort of overall design of the exhibition space. And we did have a little bit of insight into the fact that Flying Scotsman was to be the last special stamp issue, the commemorative issue that was done recently for Flying Scotsman was to be the last that was to feature the cameo of the late Queen. So we thought it would be a fitting way to sort of bring that element of the story into the display. And then we wanted to sort of show that, of course, the range of stamps today and the variety of the range of stamps today. We picked one of my colleagues' favourite stamp issues, dinosaur issue, because we thought it was, you know, it's really beautiful artwork for this, a lot of hand-drawn imagery for this issue. Some really clever designs, and the stamp obviously breaking away from the frame of the stamp as well, with the dinosaur's head and feet poking above the edge of the stamp, which is making it slightly different to some of the other stamps. So it was just something a little bit different. As I say, we had literally hundreds of things we could have chosen. We could only select a small selection to display, and so those were the the ones we opted to do. So to move on then to the stamp, the new definitive stamp for King Charles, which you will have now seen. This, of course, was shrouded in great secrecy for a long time, and it was a long time before we were able to really even determine the exact dates we were working to for this exhibition. Normally with exhibitions within the Postal Museum and within probably every other museum, they're done quite collaboratively, they're done with a lot of people involved, done quite openly within the organisation, and everybody's involved in knowing what's kind of going into the display. This was done in a much different way, not in a way we've ever worked before, and probably not in a way we'll ever work again because of the sensitivity around the subject matter. Royal Mail were obviously working with Buckingham Palace and with the King to design and come up with a concept for the new stamp. So initially we were working really without any idea as to what the final stamp would look like. We kind of assumed it would be the same basic shape and size in terms of the finished sheet of stamps, but we didn't really know at that early stage as to what we were looking at exhibiting and what we would actually have to showcase at that point where we reveal this stamp. But we had some very initial discussions with Royal Mail, and one of the things we agreed with them early on was that the Postal Museum would be given the opportunity to work with Royal Mail and have this unique opportunity to actually showcase the stamp before it was issued to the general public. So a date was agreed that the image of the new stamp would be released. The image, not the stamp itself, the image would be released. And that was then for our target date to open this exhibition, have it open on the day that this new stamp design imagery was released. So as we began to work towards a sort of more fixed date, we then began to sort of think about how we would kind of hit this deadline. So we started working more closely with our exhibition designers. We had to work very closely with Royal Mail and through Royal Mail with Buckingham Palace to understand the process and the timescales. And there was obviously a lot of back and forth over the design. As you know, the decision was taken to use the same image as of the King as it used on coins. And so we had to work with an additional partner in the Royal Mint. The Royal Mint obviously commissioned that image of the King for the coins, and that same image was used for the postage stamp. So we borrowed material from the Royal Mint collection, the Royal Mint Museum collection, including a plaster cast, a cast of the actual image that was used for the coins, some of the photographs that were used. And what Royal Mail did was to digitally relight the image of the King. So they took an image from the plaster cast, and we have one of the plaster casts on display in the exhibition. Royal Mail digitally relit that image in order to try and create something that sort of harked back to the sort of the classic design of the Machin design used for the late Queen. The feeling was that that was the design direction that was required for this. There wasn't a desire to sort of create something completely different. The desire was to sort of reflect and respect the sort of special place that people hold for that image of the Queen, and to sort of base a future design on that. So the basic structure and framework of the stamp was to remain the same. As you'll recognise, the colours remain the same. The basic format remains the same, but obviously the profile image was to change. So working with the Royal Mint, working with Royal Mail's design team, the image was digitally relit to allow it to be used on stamps. Obviously the way it's used on coins, the way it's used on stamps is very different. And within the exhibition, there is a test sheet on display that shows this sort of different versions, about nine different versions, and it's all subtly different in terms of their digital lighting. The image is exactly the same, but the way it's lit digitally alters in order to work best on two different colours, and darker coloured backgrounds and lighter coloured backgrounds. So as you know, the higher value stamps have a lighter coloured background, white background with a coloured profile image, and then these stamps, the lower value NBIs, have that that block colour background and the lighter image. So the two versions of the profile head were selected in order to work across both of these backgrounds. We then had to work around getting material in advance of release. Obviously, this was a highly confidential process, a highly confidential stage of the project. The Postal Museum is, as I'm sure many of you know, an independent charity. We're not part of Royal Mail, so we're not part of the postal sort of service. Therefore, we're not necessarily automatically privileged to the same information that they have. So we had to work very closely with them in order for them to sort of share this information, these images with us in advance. I met with Royal Mail and we sort of talked about what the stamp would look like. So we were able to sort of write the information and tell the story of the development of the stamp. And then, of course, we had to actually get hold of some examples of the stamps themselves, including some of this trial material that I mentioned, some of these early printings of the stamp, which are on display. So I actually visited the printing house, the security printers, Carter International Security Printers in Wolverhampton, where the stamp was being printed. So I went there and I met one of the printing managers there, and in agreement with Royal Mail, took away some examples that form the basis of the display, including the finished sheet that you'll see on display in the gallery. I also took away some other sample material, all of which is on display. There's nothing which isn't on display. Everything I took away is on display. We then had to work on preparing the stamps for display. Again, had to be done under some great secrecy because these images couldn't be seen even by our colleagues, even senior colleagues, even our chief executive, who I report into in the museum, didn't see these stamp designs initially. This was done under the strictest of confidentiality, so that there was no danger that the image could be accidentally leaked from the museum prior to being shared publicly. So it was a very involved and very complicated project and process, and certainly not something done in the way we've sort of ever done anything like this before. We then, of course, have to move into what, for most of us, I think, is the most interesting and exciting bit of any exhibition, which is the install, actually getting it all in there. It's the most interesting and exciting bit, but it's also in many ways the hardest bit, both physically and mentally, because you're obviously working to a tight deadline. And once again, we were working with that secrecy. This image, at the point that this photograph on the left was taken, this image still hasn't been publicly released at the time we took this picture. So we were having to put this into the display case to check it fitted, take it out again, and then put it in again for certain bits of advanced photography that we had to do ahead of the sort of press release, and take it out again. All the while making sure it wasn't seen by anybody who hadn't been sort of approved to see it, and more importantly, make sure that nobody had sort of even accidentally taken a photograph with it in the background that could have possibly been sort of released early. And also all the time making sure we display things carefully and with good sort of consideration to the preservation of the item and the security of the item. And so you can see two of my colleagues here working on it. So there was a small team, there's three of us essentially, who installed the vast majority of this exhibition, myself and the two people here, Georgina and Jackie, our conservator. The finished exhibition, hopefully some of you have been to see it, and hopefully those of you who haven't will do so soon. The finished exhibition, I think, really it does what we set out to do. Really, it sort of showcases some of the prize exhibits from the museum's collection, shows some of the really important items that we have, and I think gives it that really kind of respectful display that we aim for. Those who visited the Postal Museum before will know we go for quite a sort of bold colour scheme in the museum, quite a kind of vibrant display style to engage that younger audience that we get a lot of through the door. But we wanted this to be slightly different. We wanted this to be sort of respectful of the subject matter. So we chose deliberately and carefully the exhibition designer we picked for this show. Here we see some other images of the exhibition and this kind of procession of line of monarchs from Queen Victoria through to Elizabeth II that I mentioned, that we so we can sort of take the visitor through that journey, with at the far end of the space the King stamp on display, deliberately blocked slightly by the display cases, so that when visitors first come in, they first of all see this procession of monarchs, the earlier stamps, some of which they'll be very familiar with, some of which maybe they won't, before they work towards seeing the new stamps. So they understand the history, the background, the process behind the stamps before they get to the stamp itself, the new stamp itself. With all our exhibitions, we try and include sort of slightly more interactive and fun elements. We wanted to do a little kind of game for visitors to try and match postage stamps into the correct order, with the correct monarch. So we've got small magnetic stamps, well, smaller, bigger than the real stamps, but little magnetic stamps that people can apply to these boards. Just a little sort of fun activity. And the royal cipher on pillar boxes, we, as mentioned earlier on, we know that's really important. We know that's really interesting to people. There are a lot of inquiries, incredible amount of inquiries about ciphers on pillar boxes. So we wanted to take the opportunity to display those royal ciphers and to show the basic different types of cipher that appear on letterboxes. And we actually created a 3D model of one of the ciphers, which is in that box that you can just see disappearing off the bottom of the screen there in the image. There's a sort of feely box, you put your hand inside, feel the 3D printed cipher, and guess which it is. So it's just a little bit of an interactive element, but trying to keep it as simple as we can. And this, of course, all culminated in the release of the image to the public and the release and the opening, rather, of the exhibition itself. Our in-house photographer, Louis Porter, was asked by Royal Mail to complete some photography on the new stamp, again, done under incredible secrecy, because this was all done prior to the image being released, in some cases a couple of days before. And on the day the image was released to the public, the day before the image was released to the public, the press, selected press, were invited in to take photographs of the stamp. The photograph on the right, with it being unveiled there from Victoria Jones, that was done the day before. So this was photographed in advance during this kind of press preview, ready for the image to be released to the press the following day. And the following day, we had a BBC Breakfast News broadcasting live from the museum, and doing a piece about the new stamp live from the museum. It attracted incredible publicity, international publicity. We had journalists from all over the world coming to the museum to talk to us about the stamp, to take photographs, to interview people about it. Royal Mail were very heavily involved. Royal Mail's press team and our own press team, headed up by my colleague Annie Duffield, worked really, really hard to create a great event for the press to really preview this stamp and give people the opportunity to receive the new stamp and to give a sense of special reveal around this stamp. And so then, for a period of time, the Postal Museum, right up until April, when the stamp was actually put on sale, this was the only place in the world that the new King's definitive stamp could be seen. And finally culminated in some filming a few weeks ago now, again ahead of general release, on the Antiques Roadshow of their coronation special. It's actually coming out this Sunday, so the day after the coronation, so Sunday the 7th. In the evening on the BBC, there'll be a special edition of the Antiques Roadshow, talking about lots of items pertaining to sort of royal history and coronations, but including us talking to Francis, one of their experts, their paintings experts, about the new definitive stamp for Charles. And this was the first time this stamp had sort of been taken out of the building. We actually took the opportunity to do something we very, very rarely ever do, which is to take a sheet of penny blacks out of the museum building and along to filming the Antique Roadshow. We wanted something that really helped tell that story. So there are 3 objects we took along. One is not included in this picture, which is the Machin cask we took along sheet penny blacks, and the new definitive stamp for King Charles. And so if you want to see more about this, it will be on this coming Sunday, I believe, on I'm assuming on BBC One. Thank you very much. Hopefully that offers you an overview of the process, sort of behind the scenes look at the process of designing an exhibition at the museum. And it's the sort of basic process we follow with all exhibitions, but this one done under slightly different circumstances, and a little bit of an insight into the development of the new definitive stamp. So thank you for your time. I'm very happy to take questions. I see there's one thing in the chat and I haven't actually clicked on it to see what it says.
Chris, thank you so much. I love that you're going to be on the Antiques Roadshow on Sunday.
Yeah, so do watch and do spread the word as well.
I will do.
It should hopefully be. It was a really nice interview with Frances. I forgot her last name, but Frances, who's the expert on paintings. Really nice interview. Exactly what they include in the final cut, I couldn't say. I don't know. But hopefully it'll be of interest and things. There's been a little bit of preview to it on social media already. So
amazing. It's definitely one to look out for. Thank you so much for that. That was a really interesting talk. Brilliant. Has anyone got any questions for Chris? Please do just pop them in the Q&A. Whilst we just see if anyone's going to pop any questions in the Q&A, I would just like to say that thank you so much for everyone for attending and coming and listening to Chris this afternoon. It's lovely to see you. Well, lovely for you all to be here to see Chris. And if you are heading back into the show, don't forget to head to the booth hall, check out the PTS members there. Lots of offers on the stand, so please do head there. The full roundtable talk schedule can be found under the agenda in the lobby area. And if you want to support Stampex in general, then you can become a patron. There's more on that on the website, stampexinternational.com. And yeah, loads going on. So please do head back. Chris, thank you so much again. That was absolutely wonderful. Should we dial off?
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay. Thank you for everyone.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks. Bye-bye.